According to band defenders, rapier fighters are all brigands, crooks, and thieves. Tonight, we're going to talk to Lochac. I'm Wistric.
I'm Bruce.
And this is Fighting the World, the Lochac special.
All right, so we've been looking to do this for a little while for all our regular viewers, and we're really, like I said earlier while I was getting to know our panelists, we're really grateful we don't have to do this at 2 p.m. So if you're joining us live or you're joining us a little bit later down the road when we post this, welcome. So first thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna have the panelists introduce themselves, and I would like to know mundanely where you're from, because most of us Americans are kind of bad at geography, and where you're from in the SCA as well. So give as many or few titles as you want. And I'm gonna start with you, Kit.
Hi, I'm, I suppose technically the Honourable Lord Kit Hackworth. I run a class once a week, which has got a secondary focus on small unit games and melee. And I was lucky enough to be given the Hero of the War cloak at our kingdom's largest war everything event at one time, which is really good.
Okay, where are you from mundanely, and what is the name of the group in the SCA?
So I'm from Gaard, which is South Australia, which is, if you see Australia, it's sort of the middle at the bottom.
All right, thank you very much, Kit. I'm gonna jump to Caleb, who's next in the row.
Hello, I'm Master Caleb Adolphus. I'm from Sydney, or Barony of Rowan in the SCA. I've been doing this stuff for quite a long time now, 22 years. Angus and I realised we've been playing together, so yeah.
That math is always dangerous. All right, I'm gonna jump over to James.
I'm Master James of Southron Gaard. I'm in the SCA from Southron Gaard, which is Christchurch, New Zealand. Southron Gaard encompasses the entire South Island of New Zealand. I'm a Master of the Order of Defence. I am currently Deputy Kingdom Rapier Marshal, and I tend to run the rapier activities most years at Canterbury Fair, which is the largest event in New Zealand.
Awesome. All right, and I promise not to freak out too much. Kiwi birds are like my favoriteest thing ever. All right, Angus, you're next.
Hi, I'm Angus, Master Angus Galbraith. I am from Rowan, which is Sydney. As you heard earlier, myself and Caleb go way back in the annals of time. I'm a guild master of the Guild of Defence of Lochac, and White Scarf, and spend a lot of time teaching people.
All right, that's awesome. And that's kind of where we all end up, teaching the new people, which is how we keep going. All right, last but not least, Raegan.
Hey, Raegan. I'm also from Sydney, or Barony of Rowan, very much taught by Caleb and Angus. I've only been playing for 11 years though, so a bit of time to catch up on. And I've run or helped run the fencing at our biggest event festival for the last 5 years now.
Fabulous. It's kind of awesome to have you with your teachers. I don't know if that's awesome or if we're going to put you in kind of a rough spot. So I apologize. Just maybe that.
Push it over to them.
It
might be time to get them back. All right. So the first question I'm going to ask, and there's no wrong answer here. Wistric and I are both from major players in the Pendic War, and what our idea of melee is very different from even the West Coast of the United States. So I'm going to ask this first question to each of you, just in turn again. And I want you to describe what typical melee looks like in Lochac. We've heard already that we have a teacher of small groups and small group tactics. We've heard about some larger events like Canterbury and Festival. And just give us kind of a description of not your best melee, not your worst melee, but just how do people get together in groups and fight in Lochac? I'm going to start actually with Angus for this one, and I'm going to jump around, but each of you will have an option to answer. So just think on that as we go. All right, Angus, typical melee.
Typical melee. Most of the melee that I've been involved with is at Roni, which is our festival event. And it's somewhere between 15 and 30 people aside combats. We also have it that it's usually like a fort battle or field battle type combinations. And we have tournaments which are either groups of 4 or groups of 5 at that event as well. So small team 20s at that event. And at our regular practices, we try and schedule when we have practices, we try and schedule some melee to get people used to being on the field with more than one opponent.
Fantastic. I like to hear that we're practicing melee, and I chuckled a little bit because we go through our outline as we're asking questions, and I was about to type in, we should ask about practices, right as you mentioned practices. So good job reading my mind. I'm gonna jump to Caleb next, and then Raegan, you're on deck, because I kind of want to hear a little bit from the same perspective in the same barony. Caleb, typical melee.
Yeah, typical melees tend to be small. I mean, as Angus said, Rowaney's our biggest event, and 15, 20 people on the field would be normal for that. Other than that, thank you. Thank you, Rapier Marshall. I appreciate your correction. Yeah, typically it's pretty small groups on the field. The normal melee, therefore, tends to either be sort of the stuff that happens at practices or smaller events. So they'll either be pairs or threes, maybe fours. Often, if you've got fours, there'll only be 2 teams in existence. So that's a bit more limited, just from a numbers perspective. You can't really pull that many people into a rapier melee. There's just not that many people in Lochac. Yeah.
What is the rapier population there?
Probably, I would say we've probably got about 100 authorized. Maybe 150.
But that type of turnout, for even with 15 to 30 people per side, that's pretty incredible percentage-wise, just from doing the numbers here in the mid. Sorry, I'm like, oh, this is so cool.
Mad props from Art from here, because we've got maybe the same number authorized in Meridies, and we don't have to cross Australia or, a sea. We just have to cross Atlanta. And that would be a great turnout for an event here. So that's pretty cool.
Same here. We just have to cross Ohio, which is scary, but not quite the same. All right, Raegan, you're next. You chimed in there when Caleb was describing. So what does typical melee look like in your neck of the woods?
So I'd very much agree. If it's not festival or an event specifically designed for fencers, and we do have those occasionally, but not as regularly, you're probably looking about 12, 18 people total on a really good event. And quite often we'll do small sets, so 2 or 3 people aside, so you can get people running around forts and different things with a bit more versatility.
All right, well, I'm going to delve deeper with you later, because we definitely want to ask a little bit more about kind of common scenarios in your area, because we see that smaller kingdoms and smaller units get to run much more interesting things, because you're not trying to wrangle 200 people to do something. All right, Kit, you're up next. What is typical melee like in Southern Australia?
So down in Inelgard, we've got a reasonably good focus on making it fun, and we've got a pretty big rapier field Australia-wise. Our melees tend to look 6 to 10 people aside, and then that sort of breaks down to either a themed battle, like a pirate ship boarding tourney, which we've done a couple of because we've got apparently pirates down here, or if it's a more standard battle, we sort of end up with a lot of line fighting and some broken down 1v1s, but we're trying to get into more coordinated tactics.
Awesome. Okay, well, we're definitely going to delve a little deeper with that as well, with the common scenarios and tactics and how you're training. So we'll be back. And then last but not least, James, what is typical melee like in New Zealand?
So we have an even lower population density than Australia. Just looking up the authorizations database, there's 175 rapier combatant entries in the database. That does include all of the expired fighters as well. Unfortunately, there's no useful way of bringing up that statistic. But in Southern Guard and New Zealand in general, most of our events don't have the number of people required to do melee scenarios. Canterbury Fair is the main one that has melee scenarios. In general, we fight the melee scenarios as teams of a couple of teams of 3 or 4. So I think the most that we've had on the field at one time was 15 at Canterbury Fair. And so they're small games, small unit tactics, rather than sort of a larger scale open field battle. Over the last couple of years, we have been trying to get more emphasis and more people trying to get involved in the in a field battle, because we do have a war field which is used by the heavy fighters, but we just don't have the numbers to do the sorts of things that the heavy fighters are doing in New Zealand. So small unit games are the main things. It's always an item in the timetable. Some people really like it. Some people prefer to watch it because some of the games end up with some interesting hilarity happening. And we're doing a push to get people who are interested in doing melee but don't necessarily want to be spending all of their time learning how to use a sword by getting them interested with rubber band guns, much I'm sure to other people's disappointment.
You can tell Caleb's really upset that more people don't want to use rubber band guns.
Yeah.
I see him crying over there.
So one of the things that we have in Lochac, I'm not sure if it's around in many other kingdoms, is there is an authorization for rubber band guns only, which means that you're authorized for the use of a rubber band gun, but not for the use of a sword or another melee weapon. And that was, I believe, introduced as a way of trying to get people more involved without requiring a lot of time commitments.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump this shark here and ask, how do you authorize someone in just rubber band gun?
Because they don't have to demonstrate calibration with a sword, it's essentially pretty similar to a regular rapier authorization, but they don't have to prove that they can hit somebody safely with a sword. They still need to know how to be hit and how to be killed and all of the rules, but
do they still go through armor inspection? Sorry, now I'm just like, logistics.
Yeah,
I don't know of any other kingdom that does this. This is actually pretty cool.
Okay, so essentially, they follow all of the same rules as a rapier combatant, all of the same authorizations, except that they don't have to show safety and proficiency with a sword.
Okay. That's so fascinating to me, because where I'm from, if you have a single auth, you can walk out with a rubber band gun. No questions absolutely asked.
So it's not an authorization for the use of the rubber band gun. That's part of your rapier authorization, but it's an authorization for a person who wants to use a rubber band gun but doesn't want to use a sword.
Sword, yep.
It possibly should be mentioned that the convention in our kingdom is that there is one rapier authorization, and that authorizes you for all weapons and rapier except for the spear. And
I'm a little jealous. We
got rid of the offhand offensive, offhand defensive, separate authorization stuff quite a while ago.
So the rubber band gun off, you said it was kind of a way to get people sort of participating. Who, how successful is it at getting them hooked?
Well, I think it's fallen down due to lack of advertising, because most of the people that I've mentioned it to haven't realized that it was a thing that they could do. And so many of the people that I've said it to have said, oh, that'd be really great. I'm going to start looking into that. But over the last sort of 2 years, nobody that I have talked to who wasn't already a rapier combatant knew that it was even a thing. So I think it falls down due to lack of advertising.
Oh my God, I would have loved that. I would have run around going pew, pew, pew.
That is the market that we are catering to.
Congratulations, you found your mark. That's amazing. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna sit here. I'm from the mid-realm where we believe in paperwork. So we have authorizations for every sword form, including two-hander, including parry. So hearing that just makes my little dark heart pitter-patter. All right. So we've heard a little bit here about your largest events like Rowaney Fest and Canterbury. What are some of the logistical issues for running that type of large scale melee? I'm going to open this up to all the panelists to just pipe in when you start thinking about that, because I figure with the commonality of Lochac, it's probably going to be a lot of very similar issues. We see that in the kingdoms here as well. And then I'm going to transition from there into the common scenarios of those larger events. So kind of think about your logistics from there. So open to the floor. What are some of the logistical issues in running large scale melee in Lochac?
I guess I'll jump in first. The primary logistical issues all, I think, arise from Lochac's size and population density. To give people an idea, mainland Australia, excluding New Zealand, is bigger than mainland USA, excluding Alaska, slightly. It's very big, and it's one kingdom because of the populations. And if, Kit is trying to host his rapier melee event in Adelaide, and I want to get there, that's a couple of hour plane flight. Same for him if he wants to get to Rowaney, let alone the poor people living in New Zealand who have to cross international borders in order to get to anything. That also has effects on things like local conventions and calibrations. People just read rules slightly differently, and there's always conversations about what sort of things are acceptable and unacceptable, particularly around the fringes, because people interpret these things differently, and groups do things and play in certain ways and have certain expectations. And it can be easy for people to get upset at behaviors that one group thinks is completely fine and legitimate, and other groups go, no, that's safe, that's not okay. And I've run into those issues numerous times as marshals and combatants. So that'd probably be the things, and just getting enough people to an event, getting it organized, advertised really early, and then pushed enough that enough people actually rock up that you can do a sensible melee.
What sorts of, I guess, discrepancies in conventions, those issues, what sorts of things do you see?
So
Sorry?
I know New Zealand has.
Somebody's going to break in. Sorry, I didn't want to talk over anybody. I've seen, we've had issues in things like calibrations, particularly as a lot of the fighters won't have had a big melee event before, and the adrenaline gets up, and there's already slight differences in group calibrations, but if theoretically all being to the touch, does it have to land square? Does it, how hard is it to touch is still actually an open question in some ways. And so you've got that, you've got behavior in terms of how aggressively you should be moving in a combat and what's safe. A lot of the more heavy experienced fighters will move a lot more aggressively on the field, sort of push through people and stuff. And again, that's raised some issues. There's been people who've found that behavior upsetting. And then you've got to sit back and go, well, is this legal? Is this in the rules? Is it something we want to foster? And that's a conversation you kind of have to have either after an event or while people's blood's up, which can be a little interesting from a martial art perspective. I guess that'd be the major sort of things I see. And yeah, just the physical, getting enough people in one physical location to even have a conversation. You can't discuss calibration over the net. I mean, in the end, that's got to involve poking people with swords and running through sort of scenarios and all that stuff.
A big difference we've noticed is in some groups, if you take somebody's hand, they're used to people stopping and letting you change over and then keep fighting. And in other groups, you get taken in the hand, you better be really quick at changing, or you better be stepping out of distance because their next beat is going to be coming straight down your center line.
Raegan, did you have something also?
Yeah.
That you're going to chime in?
Less of a different alternative. I've just spilt my tea. Less of interpretational things, but there are optional rules that we have. So blade grasping is one, whether you can grab the sword, and there's another, and my brain's just dropped it.
Hip cuts.
Tip cuts. And so in Rowaney, we would pretty well just assume tip cuts are on and that blade grasping is not. But I believe in New Zealand, blade grasping is always assumed on unless you've had that discussion.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So you get somewhere and everyone just assumes their rules are the go.
Y'all have within one kingdom what happens at Pinzik.
Wistric and I've been looking at Wistric's screen. I'm like, Wistric, are you gonna mention it? Because everything you've said, so we have some of that within our kingdom, but it's usually the furthest pieces. Like, so the mid-realm is from Michigan, which is very northern, almost Canada, to Kentucky, which is kind of south in the US, and we butt up against Meridies and Atlantia, and these are all the arguments that we have with Meridies and Atlantia at Penzik in the Marshal's Court. So it's actually kind of fascinating to hear this stuff on both a macro and a micro scale. So I kind of wanted to ask, you've mentioned that you're running into issues getting people to travel to the events without lots of forethought and knowledge, but you also can't seem to get enough of the population together to have conversations in full about what is a touch, or some of these conventions, whether they're on, off, optional, etc. Is there a lot of travel between New Zealand and Australia? And is there a lot of travel between the East and the West Coast, or the North and the South Coast of Australia for SCA events? Like, what does it typically look like? And I'm going to open that up to everyone because I don't want to just go one by one for that.
A number of us do travel on a semi-regular basis and sort of go to different regions. So we've had I've travelled to Brisbane and to Canberra to do fencing, and I've travelled down to Canberra, which is about a 3.5 or 4 hour drive from my place, just to do some training for people, and there are a small group of people that do a lot of travelling, and that helps level the field on how rules are seen and how you interpret them. So it certainly helps with the travel, but it is distance is a pain.
It sounds like it.
A lot of people in the groups travel over to Sydney for a festival once a year, which is our big event. But as far as travel, if you want to go to more than just the same 3 local events, you have to. Unfortunately for us over in Guard, our nearest group is a 9-hour drive away. So
I think maybe we should talk a little bit about the geography that we're dealing with. There are in New Zealand there are 2 baronies and 1 shire in the entirety of New Zealand. The barony of Southron Gaard encompasses the entirety of the South Island. I live in Christchurch, which is in the middle. It's 6 hours to drive north to get to the top of the South Island, and it's 8.5 hours to drive south to the bottom of it. It's a 1.5 hour flight for me to travel from Christchurch to Auckland, which is the other barony, or the mundane location of the other barony, and it's a 40-minute flight for me to travel to the other shire that is in the area. It's a 3.5 hour, it's a 3.5 hour flight for me to get from Southron Gaard over to Brisbane, Sydney, or Melbourne, which are in 3 different states.
And you've still got to clear customs and immigration.
And I've got to do all of the fun international stuff. There are no direct flights from Christchurch to get to anywhere else in Australia. I've got to transit through Auckland. I worked out how long it would take me to get to Innisfail, which is in Tasmania. It was the quickest that I could get there was literally a full day's worth of travel, leaving at 6 a.m. and arriving at about 9 o'clock at night. And that includes the 3.5 hour time difference. To get back is a day and a half. The drive times for driving across there are quite significant around Australia. So just to try and put it into a bit of perspective in terms of getting things, all of Lochac is far-flung.
I can never complain about the flight to Australia ever again. Oh my goodness.
I try and make it over to Australia 2 or 3 times a year.
Wow.
I drove to Brisbane, and it takes about 12 hours to drive to Brisbane from Sydney.
Yeah, we do that trip, I think, usually about once a year.
Yeah, same. But I mean, even getting to the nearest barony to us in Rowaney, which is Mordenvale, Newcastle, that's 100 kilometres. If you've got any traffic, it's an 1.5 hour drive for the nearest barony. If you're talking about Perth on the other side of the continent, that's a 4 hour plane flight, I think.
4.5 or
4.5, depends on the winds. And it's expensive as well, because there's just not much traffic across that route.
So the geography is really working against you guys for some of these larger events. Just so out of curiosity, you guys have both, all of you have mentioned Canterbury and Fest.
Yes.
Where are those events held?
Canterbury Fair
is held in Sydney.
Canterbury Fair is held in Southron Gaard, about an hour away from the airport.
Okay.
Canterbury Fair is normally about 300 people. That's the largest event in New Zealand.
Wow.
Rowaney Festival's held about 40 kilometres west of Sydney, southwest of Sydney in Mittagong, or near Mittagong, which is a town in the Southern Highlands in Australia. It's tops out at about 1,000 people through the gate, although not all of them are there at the same time necessarily. And that's far and away the biggest event in Lochac.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So comparably here, that would be a lot like the Outlands. They're Western United States, Colorado, etc. And one of their largest events is Battlemore, which is very similarly sized to Rowaney Fest. And having been there, it's actually very interesting to hear that that is the largest event for this kingdom. So I guess the next question for me is, what do typical melee scenarios look like at these large events? You've mentioned that you'll have like 30 to a side, but what do you guys fight over? Why do you train your 2v2 units, your 4v4, your 5v5s? What are you guys fighting over after making these massively long pilgrimages?
I'll dog Justine in on this one to talk about the sheep stealing.
Okay.
So we do run sort of a range of scenarios. We generally start with the basis for the event. So at festival, we usually have the crown and whatever reason they've decided to go to war for. So very much we have the same thing on the heavy field, and then you'll pop over to the rapier field and have the same notion of conflict. And then as the day progresses and we lose some of our fighters, we then deteriorate into the fun littler combats with smaller units. The last 2 years at festival, we've ended the day with basically laser tag with RPGs around the fort, which was quite good. But in terms of scenarios, my partner usually runs those, but I know that Kit's run a few recently at a few events, so I might pass it over to him.
So we thought there wasn't enough rapier war. So 2 years ago, we decided to run a rapier war event, get a whole heap of teachers together and try and get people to learn to do war better. And we were theming the events. That one, we were a lot of line fights around obstacles. Yeah, it's probably most. We don't have a lot of infrastructure down here, so we were trying to do what we could with not a lot.
That's where a lot of the innovation comes from. Okay, but I have to jump back. RPG laser tag? What were the rules? What was the goal? Like, if I showed up as Johnny Newbie and I had my authorization and I had an RPG, what would you tell me to do? How did this work?
So we did actually have, I think 3 or 4, people who are only authorized in RPGs, who'd sort of helped out in a couple of scenarios. Our collegians, our university students, have fundraisers essentially at festival to get some money. And so you can go and purchase 4 hours of their time. And if you've told them beforehand to maybe read up on the rapier rules, you can throw them kit and a gun and get them to run around. So yeah, we'd usually do a couple of scenarios, maybe 3 people, and then on a side, and then all in, everyone for themselves, just survive. So same as general laser tag. Sometimes we do capture the flag kind of deals. But it's pretty good.
It's Valhalla with RPGs. I love it. I love it so much. Jumping back to Kit, it sounds like you were doing kind of broken field battles. What did that look like? What was the scenario? What was the winnings? Like, how did you win? How do you win? Just kill them all, or was there a goal?
So those particular battles were just kill them all. We had a couple of different setups. One was we had a field with broken up top and bottom with 2 big large dividers. They were just poles with cloth strung between them, and then we allowed fighting through the center and through the sides, and that was a really good one because no team had quite enough people that they could adequately control all 3 entrances at once. So somebody would push the center or the left, and then one person would slip around the right and start death from behind him or something like that. Another one that worked a little less well, we thought, in hindsight, was we set up the same barricades like that. So one team starting up there, one team starting down there, and they were fighting down through the middle. But what we ended up finding, there was a little bit more overlap than that. What we found there was we ended up with sort of a line of fighters there and a line of fighters there, and nobody really willing to push through. We've not had so much practice as teams or units, and things like charging a breach, we're still not very good at.
That's fair. That's what practice is for. And it sounds like you guys are taking the right steps in making people fight with each other 2v2, 4v4 with what you've got and how you've got, and hearing the logistical issues on top of that. I'm actually very impressed with your melee program, because I know how hard it is even here in the mid where we're all compacted in to get people to show up and fight. So these are your largest scenarios, and I wrote a note here about hilarity that I was supposed to ask James about with running scenarios. So James, you want to tell us about your hilarity?
Yeah, it's Halloween. It's a good day to mention zombies.
Oh, yes.
So one of the more popular scenarios is the zombie scenario. One person is singled out to be the alpha zombie. Whenever they kill anyone, the alpha zombie is allowed to fight normally. The person goes down on a knee, counts to 3, and then rises up as a zombie. And anyone who gets killed does the same thing, but the not alpha zombies are only allowed to fight in a zombie-like manner, which generally means doing Spanish and shuffling around. And zombies can only be killed by headshots, as we all know. And it starts off really slow because it's one person against 10. But whenever a zombie dies, they just go to a knee for 3 seconds and then stand back up again. So you very quickly learn as the alpha zombie that what you really need to do is just suicide yourself into people to try and get some minions. And then it slowly turns more and more into an overwhelming horde. And when the last 1 or 2 people are left, there's just a bunch of people shuffling towards them, swords out, just walking towards them. And you might be able to kill 1 or 2 or 3, but all they've got to do is keep walking forwards with swords extended, and you cannot defend against all of them. And if there is anybody from Lochac, I have only one piece of advice for the zombie game. If you're one of the last couple of people, don't stand next to Thomas.
Story?
Who is Thomas?
Yes.
He doesn't have to run faster than the zombies. He just has to run faster than you. He will leg you and leave you for the zombies.
That sounds like something you would do, Wistric, or Ben.
No, so I was thinking, is the victory condition that everybody's a zombie at the end?
Yeah,
Yes.
the game doesn't stop until everyone's a zombie. And then the last person in is normally the alpha. Yeah. The last person alive is the alpha zombie for the next round.
So for our panelists, we don't let Wistric near the scenarios unless we know they're unbreakable, or we purposely want him to break them because he is a bad kid.
Yeah, so we did come up with that as well. If you suicide and one of the zombies touches you, then you turn into a zombie. It's more of a magical zombie rather than the virus zombies.
It sounds awesome, though.
Also, if somehow a zombie manages to get their fencing mask up against your fencing mask, then they have eaten your brains. So they don't have to stab you. If they don't want to, they can just keep walking forwards until the fencing masks.
Yes, that was my favourite one when we did that, and I was the alpha zombie and I didn't bother with a sword.
Are you allowed to bring RPGs?
To the people who only have the RPG off, you know.
So we generally fight those sorts of smaller scenarios in the list field. So no RPGs because of spectators. We have considered running it on the open list field, but we just haven't had enough people to make that worthwhile. At the Canterbury Fair site, the warfield is a reasonable distance from the main area so that we can fire arrows at people. And so it's a fairly reasonable trick. down to the warfield. So if we don't have to make that trek, we tend not to. The mention of sheep stealing from earlier. So there are some fluffy sheep models which are in the corners of the list field, and teams of 2 or 3 or 4 depending on numbers, and at the end of a predetermined time, the person with the most sheep in their corner, or the team with the most sheep in their corner, wins. Literally going and raiding the other areas. We've done the same thing with bags of gold as well, in years in which the sheep dolls ended up being forgotten or something. Escort missions where one person is the VIP and has to be led through from one end of the list field to the other, and everybody else is essentially attempting to assassinate or mug them.
My personal favorite's probably fencing soccer, or headless fencing, where you have, I'll actually pop a picture in, because my partner made a soccer ball that she covered with essentially a fake head covering, that I've popped in the chat. And you play soccer with swords.
So is there res?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. We usually end up with about 45% of the people who are there to play swords and forget there's a soccer ball. About 45 people who are really intent on that soccer ball and will just die continuously. And the 10% in the middle who are trying to manage both at once.
The very first one that we did, the 2 lines sort of walked towards each other and started playing soccer, and nobody was using swords. And then there was a realization by about half of the people that nobody was using the swords. And so half of the people, there you go, and the sheep marshal as well. And so half of the people just all of a sudden realized, hang on, I've got a sword. Bam, bam, bam. And then the soccer game, whoever was left nearest to the ball managed to kick it. And then the very next round, everybody went into it as a sword fight and just lined up as a line battle and fought for a bit until one team realized, hang on, we've gone past the ball. I'm just going to kick that into the goal.
Oh, it's good to hear that rapier fighters are the same, no matter where you go. So what event is this at? What?
That's festival.
That's festival?
But we've definitely played it at College War, which is our university event where all the young people turn up. And so we pull out our silly scenarios for that one.
We played at a Canterbury Fair as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, some other more almost conventional scenarios we've done that are various than some other ones. One that's great fun is Paranoia. You get everybody in a circle, and everyone man for themselves. Death from behind it is in force. If you want to be particularly mean, you only allow daggers. And yeah, it's good fun watching people getting, as the scenario's going, getting increasingly jumpy and paranoid about being murdered from behind. It's good for training situational awareness. We also have done tavern brawls. Literally, we've borrowed the tavern. They've let us borrow the tavern at festival, which is a great big marquee. And we've had everybody, you come in. Of course, you're obviously not allowed to, be holding a sword in a tavern. So you've got to kind of leave it on the table next to you, and you have a knife on the table next to you. And then at some point, you trade various insults. At some point, someone goes for a weapon. And the moment a hand touches the weapon, it's all on. So it's, trying to grab your sword fast enough before the person next to you gets you with a knife, and get you up out of your seat in time to not get stabbed repeatedly. It's fairly hilarious.
We've done the same thing at Canterbury Fair with a bouncer on the door to check weapons. So anything you can get past the bouncer, you're allowed to keep, other than your dagger, because everyone's allowed a dagger. And the bouncer has all of the weapons in a pile behind him. So if you can either convince the bouncer or kill the bouncer, then you get your pick.
Hey, Wistric, you think they'd let us run this with the Green Dragon?
Yes.
So the Green,
Especially, I got dibs on bouncer because that's gonna be fun.
The bouncer's not allowed to get involved in the tavern brawl. He's just there to protect the weapons.
Darn it.
so for your reference, the Green Dragon is our tavern at Go Fours, which is one of our larger events. And sometimes they let us hold a tavern brawl in there, but that sounds way more fun than the normal tavern brawl. Don't tell Hawk, who's normally the marshal in charge. That's amazing. Okay, so this actually brings me into a perfect transition. You've just mentioned that the tavern is usually a marquee at festival. You've also got this wonderful picture here, and I can't help but to notice that there are no hay bales. I see the pennants and the flags, but when you do your broken field, when you do your scenarios that require like breaks in the field, what do you guys use to mark the boundaries?
Okay,
Well, that photo there is of the list field area.
Okay.
But down at the battlefield, which is on that photo, pretty much directly to the back of it. So down beyond those trees, there'll be hay bales, and there's a wooden fort, like
I just
a.
sent a photo through
Oh.
of the fort.
We're gonna make Wistric work. But I wanted to ask about that because I know in Drakenvold they don't tend to use the hay bales because they tend to rot really fast. So just kind of want to touch that a little bit and see.
Well, it
Hay
doesn't
bales.
get to rot in Australia too much because there's between kangaroos and wombats and sheep,
And the kids fought.
it'll get eaten pretty quick.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Is that a permanent structure? Sorry, now
Yes.
you're gonna
Yeah.
like.
So that's the
apologize.
structure we build at festival.
That's so cool. Well, I guess that does transition me into a couple of questions, and I don't even know which direction to go because you've mentioned kangaroos and wombats and sheep, and I'm really excited about the animals. But I also kind of want to ask about what do your standard event sites look like? I know festival's not your standard event. It's your largest event. It's your SCA come home event. You obviously have a permanent structure, which here in the US is very, very rare for SCA sites. But what do your standard event sites look like, and how does that compare to like festival or Canterbury?
Our standard event sites that there's going to be rapier at.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, the standard feast takes place in a hall that you can get for an affordable cost, which in Sydney can be a little bit of a challenge, with cooking facilities and whatever. But in terms of standard events with fighting, they usually take place in parks.
Okay.
Is the short answer.
In New Zealand, a lot of the churches or scout halls or community halls that we hire have a small amount of grounds.
Mm-hmm.
We generally tend to pick the bigger ones for if the event has martial activities so that they can do archery as well. So an attached field that's connected or owned by a hall or a park that's nearby.
Okay. Do they, with the parks and with like the scout halls and whatnot, do they let you bring things like hay bales, or is that more reserved for your larger events?
There's
Larger
more
events,
reserved for the
really.
larger events.
Okay. Sorry, I'm super curious about the logistics.
Yeah. And right there.
All right. So,
If you look in the chat, I just posted up a file on what's a more normal local event to run.
okay.
Canterbury Fair uses hay bales and has a less extensive permanent fort as well at the site that we use. Ours is just a front for the gate part, but
Okay.
Oh, cool.
So that was a recently run ship battle where we had two teams of ships. You can see there the left-hand ship, right-hand ship, and what you can the chat in the middle standing there is standing in a rowboat, which requires one person at all times to stand there to pick up the rowboat, and then two other people can stand in it and fight. Unfortunately, his pilot has just been killed, so he's standing there unable to move, unable to reach as one of our teammates on the far right-hand side reloads his RPG and points it menacingly.
Oops.
Oh, poor stranded dude.
Quite often for a quick build, we'll use just giant star pickets and then mesh coverings to make bridges or very quick forts with sort of maze scenarios. And then between scenarios, you can actually pick up a star picket, move it to a slightly different spot to confuse all the fighters.
So, star picket?
Just
They're
a
those,
big
in that
star-shaped
picture, you
pole.
can see- in that picture, you can see them there. Sometimes people call them star droppers. They're the things holding up the boards.
Black.
Yeah.
Oh,
You can get them like human height.
okay.
You are kind of.
Yeah, the
Yep.
garden posts. I think we call them T-bars or something. I don't know. Okay.
Oh wow, we found our lost in translation moment.
Yeah. No,
Okay, so that's really cool. We don't tend to do structures like that where I am. It tends to be very simple, like ropes on poles. One guy has taken it upon himself to start building things, but this is very, very cool. I just props to the ingenuity there. And thank you so much for sharing your photos.
yes.
So those are definitely your largest events and whatnot. We've asked about your typical event sites, but what's the coolest event site you've ever, and this is totally Wistric's question, so I'm gonna let him ask the stupid part, but what's the coolest event site you guys have ever gotten to use as, for SCA, for Rapier? Even if it's not Rapier, just lay it out there. Time for humble brags. And Wistric, now you
Did
can
you get
ask.
to fight at Helm's Deep?
James?
It's mostly CGI, so no. We have been in talks with the people at Hobbiton about holding an event there.
See, it
'cause
wasn't a
that'd be-
stupid question.
That'd be
Because
cool.
that is a permanent village.
Am I allowed to include events I've been to at Kingdoms that aren't Lochac?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because far and away the best event I was in terms of location is Raglan Castle in Wales. If
I
you ever
was
go to
supposed to
Drakenwald,
I was supposed to
go
go
to
this year.
Raglan.
I was supposed to go this year and then COVID happened. I had my tickets. I had everything.
Holy crap. Bridge battles from the outworks into the castle on the bridge over the moat.
Oh.
And
Like-
I
And like
apologize.
fighting through the gatehouse of castles is just like,
I apologize. I'm gonna have to drop the next special episode we're filming, which will be November 8th, which will be the Drakenwald episode.
sorry, Drakenwald. All your thunder.
Talking to people who get to fight at Raglan.
And I will definitely put it in my notes that Lochac talked it up, and they should all go to Canterbury or Festival and crash
Absolutely.
his party.
Yes, they should.
We do quite often have people from Drakenwald who come over. At least two of the former crowns of Prince and Princesses of Insulae Draconis were from Southron Guard.
It should
Yeah,
also
we have
be-
a fairly bad record of accidentally stealing their crowns.
My
I
Yeah,
like
no,
which definitely.
there was two Australians who won repeated crowns in Drakenwald,
my
but they won it mostly from the Americans, so you know it's all right.
And Insulae Draconis has had quite a few Southron Guard locals. Well, not locals anymore. Former residents winning the crown.
my foster family is into Draconis, and I'm like sitting here, I'm like, did I meet them? But we'll have to name drop and brag a little bit. Lochac stealing their coronets.
Yeah,
All right.
15 minutes of that next episode.
Hey, I don't get to rib my foster father very often, and I'm a little jealous he gets to live in a place with real castles where they get to have real events in real castles and moat battles, as Caleb so excitedly put it. Ribbing him is good for his ego. So, okay, so we've mentioned the coolest sites ever. We've mentioned your two biggest events, coolest events, largest melee events. You've also mentioned that your hay bales get eaten by animals. Have you ever had an issue with animals while trying to do rapier melee? Wistric, you can add the stupid part of the question to this as well.
Do you have woods battles, or are there like spiders that'll kill you in there?
We have woods battles.
Yes.
And there are
There are
plenty of
spiders
spiders
too,
that will
but-
kill you in there.
Yeah, but they don't generally bite you. It's fine. You have to be more careful of the ants.
Mm,
When you've got the inch-long bull ants, if those things get inside your armor, it is not a pleasant experience. It's a bigger issue for the heavies. I've had 1 year at Spring War, we had kind of inch and a half long flying mating bull ants. The males are out flying around looking for ladies, and when you end up with something that is effective with inch-long wasp landing inside your helmet, yeah, you start to be very careful about moving the padding out and shaking it out and checking things.
and of course, in Lochac, we use much smaller combat blunts, which means we've got mesh over the front of our heavy helms. So they can't just get out through your visor or through your grill. You've got a sealed fencing mask type mesh, and the wasp in there with you.
Yeah, so that we do have some wildlife. Never on a field, because they not stupid enough to stick around with a bunch of idiots running around. But I have had to clear a couple of snakes out of tents at a few events.
Like,
Once again, Spring War seems to be the prime suspect for that.
When we
Remind me-
first moved to the new site for Festival, which is the current one we're using, there are a number of large holes all over the site, and about an hour before sunset, out popped all the wombats. And wombats are sizable and very, very stubborn. If that is their path that they use to get to food and your tent is in the way, then they will keep on that path.
They're very
They're
cute though.
robust
So
too.
Is that still a thing? That happens?
Yes,
And that's
yep, they're a permanent fixture. They're all native fauna is a protected. For if you're someone who's doing hunting, then you need a license to do that on the specific breeds you're looking at. But wombats are permanently a protected animal.
Love their little
Um,
faces.
So and
Um,
they're about 2.5, 3 foot long and about 18 inches wide and 18 inches tall and all muscle and bone.
There's
Yeah.
really solid too. If you hit one with a car, the wombat will walk away. Your car will not.
Yeah, they have a name amongst truckies in Australia called axle snappers, because you hit them in an 18-wheeler truck and it snaps your front axle. They
Like,
are
we
also
have to go
notoriously
move
bad
about
tempered.
cars here, really. Like, y'all, do you know what moose are?
Yep.
Okay. They're taller than me at the shoulder, giant deer things, but they're evil. And apparently in, the Northeast and in the East Kingdom, in some parts of it, driving around at night can result in your car just smashing into a moose that then walks away. But that's weighs 2 tons, not 20 pounds or whatever a wombat weighs.
You're out by an order of magnitude there on a wombat.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, they are solid muscle and bone. They are pretty heavy and about 50 kilos.
Oh.
Yeah.
And they are notoriously, I know people who work in some of the zoos and native animal places, and the enclosure they don't like going into is the wombat enclosure. They're cool with the big cats and the tigers and the elephants and all that, but the wombats is what you give to the new intern. None of the experienced people will go in there.
As far as killing your car, it's a big problem for road trips over to Sydney or between baronies. Kangaroos as well, because kangaroos love to eat grass. Grass is usually by the side of the road. And when you're driving at night or dusk, a kangaroo will sit there and go, oh, yep, there's a car coming. There's a car coming. That car is very close. I suddenly want to be on the other side of that road and suddenly jump across the road. And that's a great way to total your car.
Yeah, they
dear.
They, yeah, the trouble with kangaroos is they've evolved to be the fastest animal on the continent by a country mile. They are incredibly quick. And so their startle reflex is just to move fast. Direction is irrelevant, acceleration is important. So yeah, you'll drive along and they'll be munching the grass, and then they'll hear the car, they'll get panicked, and they'll just jump in a random direction. And if the grass is long, kangaroos kind of get down on those little front legs they have, so they will disappear into the grass. You'll have a kangaroo that's a good 1.5 meters tall, basically invisible until it leaps out in front of your car. It's so we when I'm doing long road trips, we have kangaroo watch. Whoever is in the passenger seat in the front of the car, their job is to keep watching the sides of the road for any possible kangaroos so we can slow the hell down before we hit them.
So I have to throw out there, I love seeing New Zealand just chuckling because no gently.
we don't.
To be
we don't
fair,
have
their
most
geography kills them.
Yeah, it's the landscape you got to watch out for over here.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
For us.
So Caleb was talking earlier about, or I can't remember who was talking earlier about how expensive church halls and stuff are, trying to find one at a reasonable rate that's got a kitchen. 9 years ago, we had a significant earthquake, and for a good 5 or 6 years, there were no church halls because they all fell down, and the ones that stood up were so old that they needed complete structural reinforcing. So yeah, we had I think it was magnitude 7.8. And then we had about a year's worth of aftershocks where we were getting aftershocks up to magnitude 6. As well as that, quite a lot of flooding, because we have such a low population and such a significant area or a significant amount of road. It wasn't, a lot of it was built a long time ago and hasn't been maintained as well as it possibly could have. So if it's a new bit of road, that's fine, but they got rid of the main state highway 1 in the South Island, got rid of its last one-way bridge about 6 years ago. And that is the main road that takes you from the top of the South Island to the bottom of the South Island. Most of the other state highways still have one-way bridges, and most of those bridges were built in the 1960s.
Wow. I could
But
see
we
why
don't catch on fire nearly as much as Australia.
No, and I don't think you have kangaroos.
We do not have kangaroos. We do not have wombats.
You got Kiwis.
We do have possums, and they are a pest over here, so we are allowed to kill them. And ours are a little nastier than the ones over in Australia because we don't have any predators to keep them in check.
Well, that sounds like a whole bunch of crazy logistical issues and definitely not what Wistric and I pictured when we wrote that question, but I appreciate everyone answering and illustrating.
But so much more than we could have.
We were kind of imagining like our woods battle here at Pennsic, which is you check for poison ivy, you check for fire ants in your boots, but bull ants, no. I'm good.
It's an interesting thing going over as a New Zealander because we don't have any. We have one poisonous spider that is native to New Zealand, and it is incredibly shy and timid. There are PhD students who study them who haven't been able to find field samples in their 2-year PhD study because they just hide and they burrow. And we don't have any snakes. And so going over to Australia, it's a bit of it's a learning experience.
It sounds like it would be a learning experience for both Wistric and I as well.
Do you when you take a newbie from New Zealand, do you have to kind of warn them, or do they know?
Well, I mean, they know that there are spiders and snakes, but I generally try and find an Australian to explain it to them because I don't know enough about them. But when the Australians come over here, they're always For Canterbury Fair, we have tents that can be hired. Our site is a boys' brigade camp, and the tents have no flooring in them. And a lot of the Australians have freaked out quite a lot about that. And when they see the kids running around with no socks or shoes on, just in the long grass.
Oh, but tent floors don't always help you. There was one festival where somebody put down a tent, and then there was a burrowing spider that burrowed up through the floor of his tent and hid under his pillow.
Yep. And the other problem with those is that if you bring one in, because they've got the raised lip at the front of it around the door to keep things out, it keeps things in as well.
No. So good. I'm so good.
Cooper's Lake. By the way, this is Pinzig behind me.
It's like behind me as well.
Like Cooper's Lake, this giant field, they apparently spray the heck out of everything for a month before people get there. So, like, we don't have to deal with
The worst we have, yeah, the worst we have are, sometimes we get wasps, but they're not Australian wasps in the woods battles. They're just normal little bitty dudes.
Yeah, I've had,
They
like,
hurt.
I think a yellow jacket, which was like, that was annoying.
Yep.
It's not a full ad.
Oh my gosh. Well, so I have a quick non sequitur that we wanted to ask a question on, but we got distracted because you mentioned animals, and I'm a sucker for animals. And I'm a sucker for all these horror stories because I'm not having to deal with them. But we kind of wanted to ask about the attitude of about spears in Lochac, because you guys mentioned RBGs, which we have very similar polar opinions, although we're seeing fewer and fewer people positively respond to RBGs. But spears are kind of new and different, and at least 2 people mentioned spears in their answer when talking about both RBGs and about some of your melee scenarios. So are you guys utilizing spears at all in your scenarios and your tactics?
Yes, we are.
I
So
think
the rubber
the
spears are
five-
the
Absolutely.
I think the 5 of us here were probably amongst the first 10 people or so in Lochac to get authorized with spears when they came in.
Stout.
Yep.
I missed out, but I'm keen.
Didn't fix
So
that.
at the moment we're using the metal-headed ones because the rubber-headed ones haven't been ratified into the Lochac rules yet. You look shocked at the idea of metal-headed spears.
We're not allowed to use the metal-headed ones here. We have the rubber ones, and they are in experimental phase in my kingdom.
They're
started
currently an experimental
metal-headed
here as
spear
well.
experiment.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been using the metal spears for a couple of years now, 4 years or something.
4 or 5
They've
years.
been
Yeah.
in the rules, something like that.
So they got brought in as an experimental weapon, and then they were ratified into our kingdom rules. And we're asking questions of the Society Rapier Marshal about what the rationale behind removing them from the society rules is, because the latest society rules has a sunset clause in them that they're not allowed to be used after this year. And we haven't received any answer for why. And because we weren't part of the rubber-headed spear experiment in the other kingdoms, everyone in Lochac who is spear authorized has 1 or 2 of these metal-headed spears. And so to be told that we're not allowed to use them and not being given a reason why it's a controversial decision.
It's also problematic because technically they're not allowed to do that. We actually have to be consulted on these sort of rule changes because the SCA Australia is associated with, but is not in fact part of the SCA.
For insurance reasons.
Yep. Separate entities.
For a variety of reasons to do with laws, which I will leave to those who understand these things and care about these things to deal with. But we are an associated organisation, but we are an Australian incorporated group and we follow Australian law, and we actually have to be consulted about things by the charter.
I find this fascinating. I am mundanely a lawyer. I find this absolutely fascinating. And for us, I know a lot of the discussion about the metal-headed spears was because our insurance provisions in the US with Milpitas and SE Incorporated, this is not legal advice, and I am speaking partially out my butt, but we weren't able to get the insurance companies to cover what we were doing, and without extensive testing and without extensive justifications for using metal spears, which is why they started looking heavily into the rubber and developing those.
So New Zealand introduced Lochac introduced the metal-headed spears after following the experimental weapons process. So there was the full write-up for the experiment, and then the testing, and then only certain people allowed to use it, and then a probationary period before it got put into the rules. So we have quite a lot of documentation on that, but it seems, based on the replies that have been seen so far, that the current society marshals didn't have access to that when they were making these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And currently it's looking like the time is going to run out on the sunset clause before we get a reasonable answer, and so the answer from there is to just go through the experimental weapons process again, and just make every single person who is currently authorized with a spear as one of the experimental candidates.
The experiment we ran, though, used slightly different rules to the spears rules we're using now. Particularly, it allowed sliding hands pull queuing, and it allowed push and draw cuts on it, which made the weapons a lot safer, and we had really good results with them. And then, of course, at society, it became both hands fixed and tip only, and that really limited the weapon and forced people into sort of repeated stabbing motions in order to make it viable, which makes it a little bit more dangerous.
Actual technique. Yeah. There's a bunch of disagreements about the way that the rules were interpreted and implemented.
It's interesting because I do wonder if it's partially a logistics issue, just density versus a close-knit community, because even listening to you five talk, it sounds like your rapier community is very close because there's not much hiding, and while you're having some issues getting a baseline, sorry, this is the anthropologist in me, and while you're having some issues getting a baseline for like touch calibration and whatnot, there are certain things where you guys are all very united because it's part of your rapier culture. So thank you for letting me ask you the sticky questions about spears. And I
what you did there.
There is...
did I make a pun?
The issue that was mentioned about calibrations is less about people having a difference in opinion about what it means theoretically. It's more about what it is practically. If the five of us all show up to an event, we will have slightly different calibration. If we then go away but it will all be within the acceptable sort of range of what is expected. But if we then go away and teach our local groups, and they base their calibration off how hard we hit as the acceptable calibration, and then one of those people goes away to another area and teaches from that person's calibration, you end up getting sort of a Chinese whispers worth of how hard are you supposed to hit. There is, because it's clearly written in the rules, we are fighting to the touch. There is no such thing as a light thrust, but how hard is the upper end of that is where the differences end up being. And it's a practical issue because we can't physically get every single person in one area and go, this is what it should be at one time.
We run into that with our multi-kingdoms, but we also run into that, the mid is split into regions as well. We run into that from our north region to our south region and vice versa. So it absolutely makes sense the way you just explained it. So thank you very much. I'm sorry to have opened a can of worms. But
Oh, that can of worms is always open.
Yeah.
The main issue with the rubber-headed spears at the moment is that all of the manufacturers of them are out of stock. So we
Not
can't.
anymore. We got a couple last week.
Oh, did you? Excellent. Mine might arrive at some point then.
Which kind did you get your hands on?
We got 2 of the cold steel heads, and we've got 2 more coming.
Good. Mine might arrive at some point this year then.
Wasn't there an Australian manufacturer?
Not that I'm aware of. Mine are cold steel as well.
There are no
If there is an
Australian
Australian manufacturer,
weapons.
we want to know about it.
Sports equipment.
instead of shipping them to us.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I used to make them steel-headed spears because nowhere else in Australia made them. And I used to make them and sell them, but obviously we've stopped doing that now that they're being claused out of the rules.
I actually made a pair of the steel-headed spears using some spare blades that I had, and those might have been the only 2 in Meridia's.
Mhm. I think they were the only 2 I had.
Didn't get traction.
Yep. Yeah, they were the only 2 I was allowed to play with ever because it just didn't get off the ground here as well. So it's really interesting hearing it having been implemented and successfully.
In my experience, the rubber-headed spears are better. But to remove an option because there is a better option is like saying you're only allowed to buy blades from Castile because they're better than the blades from Hanwei, so you're not allowed to use Hanwei blades. Which is a stupid reason because they're both safe.
We should just make the rubber-headed spears and the sword on a stick. A sword on a stick, so we can fight with glaives.
Cut and thrust glaive. No one will get injured.
No, I think we need to call them partisans, and then we can pull out all the period documentation. I've got documentation how to fight with a partisan.
Yes.
Well, so we've opened up this can of worms and we've done a little compare and contrast between what Wistric and I have experienced here in the States and what you guys have experienced there in Australia and New Zealand. But I think it's time to open it up to the floor and ask you, have you guys ever fought melee outside of Lochac? If you have, how did it compare? What was different? What was better? What was worse? And what was it like, I guess, going home? And that's open to anyone because I don't want to assume anyone has traveled or not.
I have been
Caleb.
lucky enough.
Right.
I have been lucky enough to be have attended Penzig in, I think it was 2016, and so I participated in the field battles and the 5-man Atlantia team battle, and pretty much anything that anyone had that I could get to it while I was there. So I fought as much as I could. The field battle was, to my scale, just massive. That many people on the field was just not something that I'd seen before in Rapier. The 5-man team combat was amusing. I was a white scarf at that point, but my white scarf was attached to my other armor. So when I joined the team, I was just an ordinary person on the team, and they were all saying, "Oh, look, they'll be the captain." And so after the first round, they went, "You're quite good, actually, aren't you?" So that was quite fun. But yeah, it was a good event, and I had a heap of fun. And it's well worth going.
How did calibration?
It was interesting. I found some kingdoms that I would wave the sword near their chest, and I wouldn't have thought that I'd made any contact at all. And they go, "No, that's good." And I go, "Well, don't think I actually touched you. Oh no, it's good. Okay. And I've had others where it was more on the heavier side when they hit me, and I'm going, it's firm, but that's okay.
Is it bad? I have two kingdoms in my head based on this interaction.
I only had the one. Just the one.
But I didn't find anyone who I wanted to have a talk to afterwards and go, that was a bit on the hard side, or you shouldn't have taken that.
So when you participated in the field battle, was it just the line fight, like both sides marching at each other, or was it did you get to do the broken field?
I did the fort battle, so we took the defend the fort, take the fort, and the field battle. And because of my travel restrictions, I had to depart at that point. So
how did your melee training and your skills translate in going from 30 to a side, or 5-on-5 or 2v2 to going here? Were you on your own? Did you find a unit? I
basically rocked up and I think there was only 2 Lochac fences that were there, and we found who we were allied with for the war, and they said, okay, you can go over and join that lot, and so I got to tag along with I think it was the Roughnecks, and I just basically kept with them, and when they yelled to go this direction or that direction, did what they said.
Okay. Yeah, no, and that's kind of what you have to do at Penzic. It's all very massive with lots of little microcosms, and sometimes, yeah, it can either be super overwhelming or you just go with the flow.
Yeah.
Okay, has anyone else traveled outside of Lochac and gotten to participate in melee?
Well, yeah, given I've done Raglan, obviously I have done it. That was the only melee I've ever done outside of Lochac, because they don't seem to do very many melees in ID. And I found it pretty much the same. I mean, there wasn't vast numbers of people in the field, so it's not a different in scale. And other than the fact that most of them obviously hadn't done very much melee fighting and didn't really have, sort of the basic field feeling and positional awareness that would be ideal in a fighter on an open field. I mean, I do heavy as well, so I've never been particularly fazed by melee. It's same, but just more people and different awareness.
No, that makes perfect sense. So I guess there's kind of a follow-up question to this that Wistric has put in our outline, and that's kind of with rapier-specific melee and traveling outside of Lochac, was there any difference in the rites and traditions of like Lochac versus Penzic or versus ID, such as saluting or what type of phrases you use on the field? Like, is hold a hold in Lochac? Probably, because that's kingdom rules. But is push the same, or is it press, or is it pulse? Like, how did commands vary, and how did some of the traditional salutes also vary, or did they?
Was it like interchangeable with what your experience, or was there
pretty much
do weird things?
Pretty much interchangeable. I found that the personal salutes in tournaments and things like that probably varied more from person to person than from kingdom to kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
But in the Malays, all the commands were fairly clear, and there was occasionally a different word used here or there, but you understood what they meant. So it wasn't that confusing.
Okay. Caleb, anything to add?
Not particularly. I was going to say unit orders.
Oh, well, okay. I'm sorry. That is the mid-realmer in me. Command staff talking, aka I roll up and yell at people. It's fun.
Yeah. But I mean, we broadly speaking, again, in Lochac, the only events with enough people for that kind of thing to even be useful, that's not just a personal communication. I mean, team of 4, it's about knowing the people you and talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
With a large side, you can't do that without taking people from groups 1,000 kilometers away from each other. And so there's no real common dialogue except for what's pulled over from the heavy field. And even that often varies group to group. I mean, heavy war field, there's not terribly consistent sort of orders.
And we've only started doing Rapier Melee at Festival in what, the last 6 years? 7?
First Rapier Melee at Festival took place in... No, the first Rapier Melee took place in Crossroads, first Crossroads.
Yeah, Crossroads.
Okay.
I've been doing it as long as I've been playing.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
Yeah.
So it sounds a bit like Rapier Melee is kind of a new addition to the Lochac arsenal, which I'm so happy we get to talk to you because I can't wait to see what you guys do in 5 to 10 years with developing your Melee program.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing it for more than 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think about 15 at this point. Because it would have been, 16 years we've been doing it for, I think.
Our limiting factor is numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, numbers and distances.
And that makes... Oh, sorry. Go, Raegan.
I was just going to say there is some bonus in Lochac. Bonus is the wrong word, but in terms of our numbers at Festival, I think the largest year in the last 5 years was like 71 people total signing in to do Rapier. And of those, I think we had 40 on the war field and on the Team Stawny field. And as a marshal, you look around and I know everyone by name. Every year at Festival, there's maybe 2 new people that I've never met before. That's it.
It also sounds like you guys tailor your scenarios to making sure that people get the most out of being able to fight for as long as possible and as much as possible, which is freaking awesome. Nothing worse than being RBG'd your very first 10 seconds into a melee, right, Wistric?
Yeah.
Right, Caleb?
That's not it, but when you travel to an event and you have like there are 2 scenarios and that's it. That's it's nice to see that like this sounds great. Like
the correct time to fence is now, the correct place to fence is here, and the correct duration is until everyone else stops.
I can appreciate that. Yeah, and after Wistric's heart. Sorry, James.
One of the advantages of having relatively small numbers is that the scenarios don't take very long. Mm-hmm. So even the res battles with limited resurrections don't take like more than 10 or 15 minutes because for the most part, because that's how many people are there. And it's also really useful because it's relatively warm in Australia, and Canterbury Fair is held in the middle of summer in New Zealand, which is not as warm as Australia, but it's as warm as I want to fight it.
Do you guys have issues when we've got such small fields? Do you guys have issues with power balancing? I've found that given we've got such small sides, one RBG only fighter or one spear fighter makes a huge difference because we haven't got that many of them. And most people just come to the field with their usual, 39-inch sword and dagger, and that's it. So like an experienced fighter or an RBG gunner makes a huge difference for power balancing. How have you guys found it?
It'd be unusual to go to an event with one RBG. Usually we've got a few people with a few going around. One year, I think Jochen brought 6 to Spring War, and that covered half the field with RBGs.
Don't worry,
the
Caleb,
do make
you
a lot
weren't
of
there.
difference.
Yes, I was.
You didn't notice him. He stepped on the field. He got hit and he stepped off.
I have a rotella for a reason.
So that's actually a good question with the power balancing. Thank you, Kit. I know where I am, we have a lot of MODs in my general vicinity, but some of the other regions in my kingdom don't. Do you ever see problems with the experience balance in addition to the weapons kit? And how do you handle those with small numbers? Or does it just kind of translate in getting kind of a good cross section every time?
Because we have a relatively low number of total people, and as Raegan was saying, most people know each other. People are not sort of stuck on, I must fight on this one side with these people and only these people. So at Canterbury Fair in particular, the people who tend to come over from Australia tend to be higher level fencers. And so in terms of balancing personnel or weapon combinations, it's a case sometimes of just switching people from one team to the other. That team has 5 mods out of 7 people, the other team has 1. We're going to change that.
Do you ever struggle with that a little bit? Because previously someone had mentioned that if someone travels from far away with their group to get to one of these bigger events, how do you handle splitting up the various groups? Or is there just kind of an implicit understanding that that's okay?
Most people are reasonably happy to stab their friends that they travel with.
Yeah, there's a tendency at the larger events. Sometimes it's just whoever and whatever sides. That's often what it turns into. Sometimes we have, various groupings based on sort of the ideas of the event, the scenarios of the event. And that tends to end up with kind of 2 groups as the foundational core of each side. And then you just throw in all the other people who've only got 2 friends with them anyway. And you just throw them in and try and make the sides as even as possible. And if they prove to be horribly uneven, we just switch people around. Because the idea is to have fun. Nobody's fighting for baronial pride. I mean, we might talk the talk, but we're here to have fun, and it's what makes it fun. And I mean, it's a problem theoretically if Rowaney, our barony, was to fight as a barony. We've got like 20% of the mods in the kingdom in our barony. And at Rowaney Festival, obviously it's near Sydney, so we have the largest turnout. And there have been scenarios where we have made it not Rowaney versus the rest of the world because that's not fair to the rest of the world. Right?
This is why we started developing lots of RBGs.
Yep. But we have people who are RBG crazy too. So yeah, look, so we just generally make the sides ad hoc. They're made to just be fun on the day, on the field, and they change throughout the day. You go, oh, this side's lost 3 times in a row. Hey, Angus, can you jump over the other side and give him a hand? And then it's like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, that seems to be even things out a bit.
Yeah. The Guild of Defence structure and regalia in Lochac makes it sometimes easier to balance. So we have a guild structure with guild masters, provosts, journeymans, and free scholars. And not everybody is a member of the guild, but quite a lot of the rapier community is. And so you can sort of start your team balance by going, okay, 2 black scarves on each side, two blue scarves on each side, 2 green scarves on each side, 2 yellow scarves on each side. And then how does that look in terms of weapon balance and things? And then sort of it gives you a starting point for creating teams in the same way as a white scarf or a mod collar.
It's so culturally different from the kingdom I live in, and I'm just like, is this a utopian society as the butterfly comes down? But that's amazing.
Yes, except the butterfly is poisonous and will bite you. But other than that, yeah, it's pretty utopian.
And the wombat will wreck my car.
Whatever.
They're cute. At least they're cute.
Yeah, they're adorable.
I've got a toddler, and his favorite TV show has a wombat as a main character. And yeah, apparently that wombat, that cartoon is a lie.
Only if the wombat's not swole, and not wrecking cars.
It's not.
Okay, so I wanted to thank you guys all so much for sharing with us. Before I take our final question, not our final topic, but our final question, and make it a little contentious in here, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for taking some time out of your Halloween. Happy Halloween. Thank you for bringing the pictures, and thank you for giving us such great conversation and insight to a kingdom that neither of us have visited. Well, not since I was like 15, and I didn't even know what the SCA was, so it doesn't count. So I'm going to make it contentious in here. You've mentioned 2 amazing events, and I'm going to make you guys fight. Which one's the coolest and why? And it doesn't even have to be those 2 events, but what's your coolest melee event? Why is it the coolest? And think of the subtext of this question. Which event should Wistric and I try to get to? We're using this as our own travel brochure.
Yeah, I gotta
So.
figure out my calendar.
I'm going to open that up to all of you, but I'd like to hear from all of you. So I'm going to start with Angus and then let you guys chime in from there. And I'll pick on you if I don't hear your voice.
Well, I think that Rowaney is probably the one that gives you a lot of, because you get a lot of people from all around. You get a good cross section of people, and you get to see a lot of stuff happening. It's also a 5-ish day event, so there's a lot to do, and you can enjoy it. And it's easy to predict when it's on because it's over the Easter break. So weather's not too hot, weather's not too cold.
There's
All
only
good.
Bolans.
Well, they're around. But yeah, that's the one though that I find to be the most fun. But there's a lot of small events, but they're not for traveling international. You wouldn't travel to those. You'd go to either Canterbury or to the festival. That'd be the 2 that you'd choose from, and it just depends on what time you get available.
Well, okay, so that was a really practical approach to which one I should choose. Kit? Oh, no, Caleb. Caleb's going to sell it.
Take 3 months off, and you can go to them both. February,
Fair enough.
beautiful. All right.
Yeah.
You go to New Zealand. New Zealand is beautiful. Spend some lovely time in New Zealand. Enjoy all the beautiful, soft, cute animals that don't bite you and the terrain that tries to kill you. And then come to Lochac and, enjoy the very ancient and slow geology and the murderous wildlife. Yeah, it depends on what you're going for. I mean, festival is the event with everything. I've never been to Canty Fair. Unfortunately, it generally falls during school term time, so I just can't take time off then. But I mean, festival is the event in Lochac. There is the one event, the rapier melee focused event in Inelgard that Kit ran, Fields of Steel, was really good. If and when it happens again. If you really wanted to go just for rapier melee, that event was really, really good. It had more rapier melee than any event I've ever been to. So if your true heart's desire in the SCA is rapier melee, Fields of Steel is pretty amazing, but Festival's got everything else in the SCA that's not rapier melee, as well as rapier melee.
All right. Next.
So covering, Angus makes really good points. If you want to get the best out of your event, go to festival. That said, you should totally come to Fields of Steel. Themed events, we do teaching at the start, and then we do as much melee as we can fit, and then we do like a team heraldic melee at the end, and it's silly and fun. And if you can convince us that you are a melee themed teacher, we like to get teachers over. So we were going to run it this year, and then everything exploded. But our plan is to keep it running every 2 years, and to get teachers over, we'd like to get international teachers to try and share the wisdom. So if you guys can convince us that you are good type melee people from overseas, we'll help get you over to teach at our event and then fight at our event.
I'm not sure we're good. but we'll do our
Just
best.
convince us. It's fine. We don't know any better.
And now I
Talk
see
about
it.
melee a lot.
Yeah, I like melee.
Melee.
See Lochac clipping this. Come to Fields of Steel. New advertisement campaign. All
Yep.
right. We haven't heard from you, Raegan.
I didn't make it over to Fields of Steel the one time it ran, but I have been to Canterbury Fair, and it's beautiful. But the year I went, most of the Darton fencers, so from up north, couldn't make it. So it was very quiet on the fencing field. I got to finally like do woodworking and other things for the week. But festivals, pretty good. It comes with everything.
That's a lot. But that's a lot of what's great about the SCA is even if you can't do what you had decided you were focused on, you get to try all sorts of new stuff, right? 100 hobbies in one. All right. Last but not least is James. I'm sorry, you were outnumbered. We needed to give you rubber band guns. Just take out all your opponents. But which event should we come to if we were to cross the pond?
If you're coming over for rapier events, you should go to Festival. There's just more people there. Canterbury Fair as an event is a really, really good event, but we don't have the population to have a really, really big field. I think the biggest year on the fencing field, the tournament field, we had 40 people. And that was for the biggest tournament that everybody who was there did. That year, the attendance for the rest of the tournaments were probably 25 to 30 people. And that's the biggest year that we've had for rapier. So if what you're going over for is rapier, then Festival would be a better choice. I unfortunately didn't get over to Fields of Steel either. The timing on it and the flight cost at the time was not able to be done, but I am looking forward to when the next one can be run, and very much looking forward to when I'm allowed to travel back over to Australia. And I'm definitely hoping to go over for the next one. Canterbury Fair is an excellent event, but it's not a fighting focused event. And so if you had to pick, I would go to Festival, but I would like to echo Caleb and say just take 3 months off and go to both. At the moment, given that you need to spend a couple of weeks in quarantine, it wouldn't be a terrible way to spend your time. I don't know about the Australian quarantine, but the New Zealand quarantine is mostly 4- and 5-star hotels. So.
Oh, and this is why you have no COVID left. We have plenty of COVID here. If you want some back.
We don't want any of that.
Those of you who know Baroness Anna of Innisfar, she just went back to Tassie and had a month of quarantining at various points.
Yep.
So, and she's actually from Australia. I think Americans aren't allowed, just flat out.
No.
We're barred right now.
Yeah.
We could not be responsible with our breath.
No, we are bad people. But okay, so if you guys have ever tuned in the past, our regular viewers will know what's coming next. And I kind of warned you guys in my little blurb, but the way we conclude every episode of Fighting the World, or FTW, is with no shit, there I was stories. So your best experience, worst experience, weirdest, craziest, but that story you tell over the campfire at 2 a.m, no shit, there I was, about rapier melee. Bonus points if animals are involved at this point, now that I've heard about the wasps and the fencing masks.
Ants.
Ants.
They were ants and they were in my heavy helm. Fine.
Okay, maybe not bonus points, but that's what we want to hear, and we'll go panelist by panelist.
And audience, while they're telling their stories, we do have audience. If you have any questions, put them in the chat, and we will get them asked of the panelists.
Since we're not running 3 hours over. It's a miracle. Thank you guys for being punctual.
Thank you.
All right. So now that we've given you some segue, like 5 seconds to think of your no shit, there I was story, I'm going to start with James, who looks the least pensive right now.
I mean, I've already told two of the stories. in the zombie scenario, don't stand next to Thomas. He will take your legs and then leave you for the zombies as he runs away. And the last festival, when I was the only mod on the field and the only person with a spear on my side, the only mod on my side and the only person with a spear on the field. None of the rest of my team even knew that there were RPGs on the other side because they were all pointing at me the entire time. Every time I got shot, it was by at least 3 shots at once. So I've already told those two. The paranoia scenario that Caleb was discussing, we decided to run that with daggers. And the first round was very, very quick because everybody just stabbed the person they were standing next to. Because you start back to back all in a big circle, except with only like 15 people. The circle wasn't that big. And so they made a rule that you weren't allowed to stab the person immediately adjacent to you or immediately next to you. I was standing next to Gordianus. We both looked at each other. We both understood what was going to happen. Leon was called. He went low, I went high. We each stabbed one person over from us and then separated and ran over. And the people on either side of us went, "How did you guys plan that?" There was no planning. There was just understanding. And yeah, that's those are sort of the one of the scenarios that we do is called a Ragnarok or a Valhalla tournament, where everybody's on the field, all on all, and when you die, you step off to the side. When the person who kills you dies, you get to come back on. We played that a couple of times with deaths from behind allowed, and it was down to the last 2 people. One of them got killed. Half of the field started shuffling back on, all through the same gateway. And the first person came on to stance against the person who was left on the field, and the person behind them went, "You're dead from behind." And the person behind them went, "You're dead from behind." And the person behind them went, "You're dead from behind." It was a chain of 6 people killing the person in front of them. From then on, anytime anybody walked onto the field, they walked onto the field, had their back to the list field, and shuffled around a bit. Would not let anyone anywhere near behind them for the tournament. But from the sidelines, because I'd been killed by the person who didn't die, it was just this amazing photo of swords on shoulders. 1 second after another.
That's fantastic, and I'll have to remember that for the next Valhalla. We run a lot of those here as well as awareness training, and I can't.
Oh shit! There I was.
Perfect way to end that. I'm gonna jump to Kit next.
One of the ones I can remember best. Before I start, I should say that whenever we're training at festival or whenever we're fighting at festival, typically Caleb and I end up on opposite sides because he's fighting with Rowan. I'm fighting with everyone against Rowan. And the first thing I'll typically do is go to one of my gunners and say, "You." As soon as Leon's called, kill him. Because if we don't, Caleb will take his Rotella and wander off to one side and draw off 3 or 4 of our fighters. He won't kill them. He'll just sort of draw them off, and then our side is 4 fighters down. It's a nightmare to deal with. So always RBG gunner, shoot him first. But that pirate ship tourney that I sent the photo of earlier, we were fighting one of the scenarios, and we had a really, really intense line fight towards the end. And then one of our flankers managed to get in the boats and jump around the side, and we just ended up rolling the flank, and 2 of the gangways were contested. The third one we poured through, and around the side we just poured through, and we're fighting and fighting and fighting. But one of the enemy, no death from behind was allowed. One of the enemy fighters was still fighting across the gangplank as we'd killed everyone else on his team, and he didn't realize it. So it's like, I'm not allowed to kill from behind. He's very effective. So sort of got up right next to him, like, excuse me, coming through, shuffled round until I was standing right in front of him, within his weapons reach. Like, "Yes, hello, you're dead, my lord."
Oh,
Absolutely wonderful. Just, "Excuse me, pardon me, coming through. Yep, by the way, you're dead." She's like, Oh,
That would have been my reaction as well. I would have been both impressed and angry. All right. Thank you very much. No shit, there you were. That poor guy. Oof. Angus, you're next.
It would have been a festival a number of years ago. It was when it was held at Yass, and we did a large free-for-all melee on a field of everyone against everyone else. And you weren't allowed to kill the people adjacent to you when you first started, but I gradually worked my way around and killed most of the people on the field. And there was 2 people busy fencing, and one was getting back towards me fairly steadily, and there was death from behind on. So when he got within range, I tapped him on the shoulder and said he is dead, and his opponent dropped his guard. Sort of like, right, okay, my opponent's dead. I then immediately lunged him and killed him straight after that. And then they said, right, let's reset. And when they all lined up, they said, right, everyone, kill him. So I was stuck in the corner with the zombie horde coming to kill me before they settled their own differences. So that was like a nice 17-1 fight.
I mean, can you blame them?
No, it was great fun. I took many with me, but I died like a dog.
Those are sometimes the best stories.
And as a non-melee fight, I was fighting my first instructor, Edmund the Lame. And this is way back, and we were in a tournament 1-on-1, and I didn't think I'd hit him, but he jumped back and said several words which we can't probably transmit on the internet, and pulled his mask off and threw it on the ground. And I'm thinking, I haven't hit him that hard. What the hell's happened here? And then out of his mask crawled a huntsman spider. And he said he was fencing, and all of a sudden his entire mask went dark, and he saw 8 legs on it, and he immediately knew something was not right. And out of his mask came a spider slightly bigger than a hand, sort of, which then promptly ran off into the forest. And it's like, okay, safety point, guys, check your mask.
Happy Halloween. Oh.
at least those ones aren't poisonous.
They'll bite you, it will hurt, and unless you're allergic to it, it won't kill you.
I think I remember him telling me that story at a Gulf Wars, because I had found like an ant in my mask, and he was like, I think I've heard that story from the other end. All right. Oh my God. Oh. All right. There we go. I feel better. All right. Raegan, you're next.
So I'm definitely a sucker for any scenario situation, so anything where the win condition is not the sword fighting. So very keen on fencing, soccer and things. But there was a brief period of time where running was legal in Lochac on the fencing field. So running until you're in distance for combat, and then fight, and then you're allowed to run to rest points and different things. And I do recall, particularly in Newcastle, Mordenvale, we popped up, and there were a series of scenarios with the bag of gold hidden somewhere in the field. And so having the teams having to split off to try and find the gold and circle each other, killing on behind, definitely on. And then just legging it with that real sense of fear of, am I going to get shot trying to get through to the fort to deposit the money, was pretty spectacular.
Slow motion action film. You can hear the score behind you as you're running. Yep.
Yeah. I died so badly.
People are loading the gun.
All right. Was there someone taller than you on the field? You'd be fine. All right. Last but not least, Caleb, your no shit there I was story.
Oh shit, there I was. A couple of little ones. There was one wonderful moment in a festival melee, and we were in a line. I think there was 5 of us in a line. I'm at one end, and a gunner gets right into our flank and fires. And I saw him pulling, so I kind of leant backwards, and the bullet flew by my head. The next person leant forward. The person after that leant forward. The next person leant forward, and the last person in our line got hit in the side of the head. And it was just spectacular because I went one way, everyone else went the other way, and this bullet just flew past where all of our heads had been and smacked the guy on the end of the line, who had no idea that he was going to get shot. And it was one of those moments when you go, we could do that 100 times and get it wrong if we were trying to practice it, if it had been planned. So that was a fairly sort of memorable, that was a bit odd, but sure, moments. That's probably the best one.
It's not bad.
No,
It's
no. It makes the Matrix a little more realistic.
It can be done.
Yeah. Oh, there was also the amusing one when we very first started doing melee years ago, and it was in Brisbane, and they were doing, team melee. Oh, no one else there had done any melee. No one else had a heavy background. No one else had any idea what was going on. And so we lined up, and I was on one side, and I killed the person opposite me in these 2 lines. And then I sort of looked, and the next person is clearly paying no attention to me. So I lunged and hit him. Forward recover, lunge, 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 forward recover, lunge. And it was 8 people, and apparently it took less than 10 seconds.
Oh.
It was just, yeah.
Oh, they have to learn to
And now
Apparently
everyone knows better.
Apparently in that group, that remains a learning story of what not to do.
We all have those. We all do. Oh, the poor group. So that's the end of our programmed outline. We planned this out and we warned you about, and now we have a couple of
A question from chat, not necessarily about melee, but how much crossover do you see with the HEMA groups and where you are? Historic European martial arts.
Yep. There's some, certainly in the more sword nerd side of things, that those of us who are really interested in research and period stuff, there's a pretty heavy degree of crossover. Most of the top people in the top kind of historical fencing groups know each other and play with each other at least a bit. So there is some definite crossover there. A couple of them, the various mods, are also active in the HEMA community.
In about half an hour, I'm going to go and teach a class for the local HEMA group.
Well done.
Yeah.
So some overlap.
Yeah, I got invited as a surprise guest at a HEMA group for their Christmas free-for-all event. And so when I arrived there, I was basically pointed out and said, okay, you need to fight this weapon against that person. And all the people who were there had never seen me before are going, why is this person being given to fight each of us in our strongest weapon? And then they discovered that I wasn't a newbie.
So we used to have almost none in our local group. Sort of one person would cross over once every so often. But quite recently, we've got lots, particularly the university group, the college. Those guys, of which I'm a member, has started doing a lot more crossover with teaching and organising with the local HEMA group, because we've realised that we're pulling from the same recruitment source. And if they want to do really, really hardcore historical fencing, they tend to go with the HEMA group because they train more harder and with really, really rigorous set curriculums. But if they want to come and just have fun and be silly with swords, they come and play with us. So we found that they're a really good recruiting pool.
Mm-hmm. We've been finding a lot of the same, which is why I'm guessing that Kato was curious about that we're seeing a lot more crossovers now than we did even 5 years ago, as HEMA becomes more popular. And with such a tight-knit kingdom, it's very interesting to hear, especially from Kit, using that as a double poll system. And then
instead of being really competitive, that is cooperative is pretty special.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, is this a utopian society? Butterfly comes down.
Also, there's a lot more availability to good, well-researched documentation in styles, techniques, weapons, training regime, structure. So that tends to get reflected across both sort of groups, I think. They both have those books, are both doing things that are very similar. So you get a lot of commonality in people's interests.
Mm-hmm.
And in their conversation. I mean, you take the HEMA people, you take our people, and you go, oh yeah, I particularly like Capifero. And I'll go, oh, I prefer Fabrice. And go, oh, why do you prefer Fabrice? Right. You can actually have that conversation, and we pretty quickly worked out that we were a lot more similar to each other than there were differences. I mean, 20 years ago, never the two would talk. It was basically a feud, but the people who are feuding have largely either gone away or grown up. And we worked out that, actually we talk the same language, we're interested in the same things, we're aiming for the same goals, and we just do it a little bit differently. And there's good things about both, and no one has to lose.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where the big fencing event in Brisbane, one of the local sword clubs comes along, and they've all now authorised an SCA rapier, and we play, and they show us what they do, and we show them what they do, and they teach classes, and we teach classes.
That's awesome. We've been running into the problem where it's still a little bit competitive, and a lot of the old guard really does feel that if someone's participating in both, they're not having the full SCA experience, or vice versa. There's some of the tension where people feel that HEMA is looking down their noses at us, which doesn't tend to be the case once you get to talking to the people who are crossing over. So that's some really great perspective from you guys as well. So thank you very, very much. I think we're going to try to wrap the recording session of this episode. If people want to hang out, that's fine. But we know that James has to go and teach some HEMA people. So I'll let Wistric do our outro like he usually does, since I spend most of the time wrangling panelists.
Well, again, thank you all so much. This has been spectacular, and we have learned very much that we did not expect to even get to talk about. So this has been great. Thank you all for attending, and thank you, audience, and have a good morning.
Morning.
Okay.
Morning.
Have a good morning.
Still morning, although it might be afternoon over at James's almost.
Afternoon.
Is it a good day?
A good day.
Yeah.
Good day.
G'day.
Oh, no.
G'day.
Wistric, you. Oh.